Hello, 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 hello. This is me and my friend Pete, the podcast that explores all things The Amazing Spider-Man. I'm your host, Gerald. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If it isn't, welcome, 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 welcome back. This week, we're diving into The Amazing Spider-Man number 4, Nothing Can Stop the Sandman. Before we get into it, we've got to do the shameless plugs. First, if you haven't already, please like, comment, share, and review, as your opinions, both good and bad, matter not only to me, but the curious folks outside of our listening community who may be swayed by your opinions to join in. Next, our Patreon, High Society Publishing presents. There, for only $5 a month, you'll find a bonus episode of me and my friend Pete, chosen randomly from my personal collection using a random number generator. If you want a little bit more control, for $7 a month, the High Council tier lets you vote from a selection of 5 comics to choose from. Power to the patrons, am I right? This week's bonus episode is Daredevil Volume 3, Number 1, Man Without Fear. And the Man Without Fear, as he often does, lives up to his name. You can find all this extra bonus goodness at patreon.com/HSPP. Again, that's patreon.com/HSPP. Sign up today as your support keeps this whole operation afloat. With that said, shout out to the Right Minders, the Big Three, the High Council, and our newest member to the High Council. Budge up, everyone. Make room. Death Dishonor. Welcome aboard and thank you so much for joining our listening community. To you I say I see you and I thank you for your support. And to you all I say, once I met a traveler from an antique land and he told me a story of the sands of time erasing the King of Kings. If sand can do that to the great Ozymandias, what chance does a warcrawler have against the man who is sand itself? Well, we're about to find out. We've got ASM number 4. We've got the Sandman. We've got name drops on familiar faces and familiar faces dropping shade. We've got me. We've got you. We've got no further ado. We've got the Amazing Spider-Man number 4. Nothing can stop the Sandman. Oh, and shout out to Percy Bysshe Shelley. Let's get into it.
Me and my best friend Pete. Old adventures, new critiques. He spins webs, I spin yarns. Kinda kooky, be forewarned. Look out, it's me and my friend Pete.
This issue of Amazing Spider-Man was written by Stan The Man Lee, with art by the crowd reaction shot God, Steve Ditko, and lettering by Sam Goes Ham Rosen. So the cover on this one, the cover is a lot different than all previous covers. That's including Amazing Fantasy number 15, where those covers have Spidey facing off against the villain in the issue in a large splash page. This one gives us 4 large panels in a square. Above it we have the Amazing Spider-Man in yellow letters with spiderwebs behind it on a vibrant red backdrop. In the panels from top left we have Spidey swinging on the middle of the street. The webbing he's holding in his left hand is an extension of the webbing from the header behind his name, and I think that's a nice touch. In front of us, with his back to us, we have the Sandman. The Sandman is a burly dude. White guy, 6'1", and he's wide. The man has tree trunks for arms and legs. He's for sure got a perm because he's got finger waves all through his brown hair. I rocked the perm in high school. I thought it was luxurious, but man, it's hindsight 2020. Everything ain't for everybody, but it was me at the time. I don't regret it. Back to Sandman is wearing a green 3/4 length horizontally pinstripe shirt, SJBs, and brown dress shoes. His pants are only blue on the cover. They're brown potato sack looking pants inside the issue. And on his feet, he's got some brown leather Rockford. So his back is to us and Spidey's webbing down. Spidey tries to grab the Sandman in the next panel, but the Sandman's waist becomes as thin as Spidey's arms. So Spidey's surprised, and we see in the next panel, he's leaned back into Matrix mode and thrown a punch with his left. And it's a beautifully thrown punch. If Sandman was a normal person, I don't care how burly he is, Spidey would have literally knocked his heart through his back. But Sandman ain't a normal person. Spidey has punched a hole through Sandman's chest, but that's only because Sandman's chest, legs, and right arm have all become sand. He's drowning Spidey in the sand from his right hand. And in the final panel, Spidey's on his back, the Sandman's on top of him, but the only things still resembling a human on Sandman's body are his head and torso, and he's just raining sand down on Spidey. And he's won, so you already know he's talking his smack. I imagine, and I'll tell you why at the end, but I imagine the Sandman has a smooth voice. Like nothing gets him too rattled or riled. So to me he says in this final panel, quote, "See why I'm called the Sandman," end quote. Beneath this we get a good question. How can Spider-Man beat a foe who can't be hurt? And then, nothing can stop the Sandman, And away we go. We got 2 more panels on this page 1 and it's beautifully drawn. We have the Sandman standing in between both panels. He switched into the brown potato sack pants, I promise, and he has his head thrown back, eyes closed, and both arms raised. He is triumphant right now. In his right hand, he's holding a large yellow bag of money, and it's as cliched as they come with a money symbol on the bag. There are bills flying, 2 police cars, and no less than 3 officers are firing at him. We have one firing from the driver's seat of his police car, his partner out of the passenger window on the roof of the car. He's firing. You already know that's Joe and Tomas. Only those 2 are wild enough to do a drive-by on a perp in broad daylight. They've got an officer on foot behind their car. He's letting that thing go. Everybody is shooting. There's a 4th cop. He's standing in front of his police car between the legs of the Sandman, and the only reason he's not shooting, I'm sure, is because he just pulled up. He's already got his hand on his hip. And in the right panel, we have Spidey throwing a useless right straight punch that's being swallowed up by the Sandman's torso as Sandman in turn rains sand down on Spidey from his raised left arm. This panel is in the classroom of Midtown High because we have a who's who of characters in the background. We have Flash, Blondie, Bruni, and a guy with auburn hair. Everybody's here. Bruni and Auburn are cheesing like they're having a blast, but Flash Thompson and Blondie are shook. Flash get points for bravery and style though because he's standing behind a giant globe, but he has his left arm out in front of Blondie trying to shield her from the fight between the Sandman and Spidey. And Flash has on a fire black and purple sweater with his SJBs. Blondie's going full pink monochrome today, so even in peril, the kids of Midtown High are going to stun on the teenagers from every other comic out there. Y'all not seeing them on the style, especially in this issue. We get a dialogue box here on the bottom. It says, "In the space of only the first 3 issues, you readers have made Spider-Man one of the greatest, most phenomenal successes in the history of super characters. And now, with this record-breaking 4th issue, Spider-Man soars to still greater heights as he battles the most fantastic foe of all. So settle back for the thrill of your life, the fateful moment when Spider-Man meets the Sandman." Spidey was on a roller coaster thrill ride. Spidey truly became the sensation of the nation. In this nation, I think that's so bonkers and so cool that he was so beloved. I think there's something about Spidey, about Superman, about Batman, about the greats that really draws masses of people because it has mass appeal, but at the same time it's unique enough to have people sit down and want to read it. And that's what Spidey's on right now. He is on a high. He is the sensation of the real world nation. Took the nation by storm. So Spidey has really grabbed hold of the imagination of readers at this point, and although his dreams of being Spyonce haven't quite come true in his universe, he certainly was becoming a superstar in ours. Back to the story opens on page 2, and we find Spidey upside down above the city, his left hand holding a web line, and he's in front of a large billboard with J. Jonah Jameson's face on. And this billboard is letting us know that Jameson is starting a new series called The Spider-Man Menace in the Daily Bugle starting today that JJ is going to be writing himself. And I'm convinced JJ bought this ad space in Midtown, close to his office building of course, so he could look at himself. And I looked it up. He's paying anywhere between $3,000 and $20,000 a month just to repeat what he says in his paper every day in a new column that's just going to repeat his front page headline. We've already seen him try to skim cash off the top on Pete in ASM number 7, bonus episode number 1 here on Me and My Friend Pete. So we know he's a bit of a cheapskate. How deep his hatred must run that he's just hemorrhaging money on redundancies. Spidey's upside down looking at this, and he's thinking some guys just never give up. And he looks down, he spots 3 seedy looking guys hugging the corner of the block beneath him. Talking about guys never giving up, I'm convinced this is Jesse and the boys from last issue out on good behavior. We've got Jesse wearing a green suit from hat to trousers with a white t-shirt. We've got Skinny Pete in a yellow flat cap, brown leather jacket and SJBs, and we've got Badger in an orange sweater and brown pants. And Spidey says, "I was right. No sooner does the proprietor lock up for the night and head for home than they start sneaking up to the place." So he thinks they're casing the joint. He watches them for a bit and sees he was right. As soon as the shop owner locks up and walks off, the 3 men make a break for the door of the jewelry shop. But Spidey's on it, and in no time at all, he's wrapped all 3 men up in webbing. But this must be the end of the batch because this webbing doesn't hold the men at all. They lift the webbing off of their shoulders and toss it aside easily. Badger says, "It feels like a piece of web dropped down on us. But who?" Spidey comes running on foot with his left arm raised screaming, "Well, it's not Dr. Kildare." Dr. Kildare was a medical drama that ran for 5 seasons from 1961 to 1966 and had a whopping 191 episodes. The guest stars on this had some pretty heavy hitters. It was essentially what St. Elsewhere was to the 80s, ER was to the 90s, and what Grey's Anatomy is to forever. So shout out to Denzel Washington, the greatest of all time. Shout out to George Clooney. Shout out to Ellen Pompeo, and shout out to Shonda Rhimes. All that to say, We know Spidey loves a little primetime soap opera action. I'm a daytime soaps guy myself. All my children was my jam. Back 2. So Spidey's running down on the trio, and Skinny Pete's panicking, screaming they're sunk. But Jesse's been jammed up before, and he knows his rights. He tells Skinny Pete to let him handle it. Spidey grabs Jesse by the collar and warns him not to put up a fight. But Jesse is fearless. He says the only fighting he's going to be doing against Spidey is in a court of law for assault and battery. And he says he's got witnesses. Badger shouts, "Yeah, that's right!" from behind them. So Badger's co-signing. Jesse smacks Spidey's hand away from his suit and pointing at the webhead goes full Matt Murdock on Spidey in the middle of the street. He says there's no law against walking the streets at night if you're an upstanding citizen, then adds that JJ is right about Spidey being a menace. And Spidey's realized he messed up. He thinks to himself he really did come at them before they'd done anything wrong. He thinks he should have waited because now he has no evidence. Realizing they've won in the moment, Skinny Pete starts talking smack. He says, with his hands on his hips, "Don't you feel like a jerk parading around in public in that get-up?" While Badger suggests they swear out a warrant, the same as putting out a warrant, against Spidey and start shouting for the police. In the final panel, we see every member of the BRBA gang, I'm going to call them the Burba gang going forward, and the Burba gang, they're surrounding Spidey but facing outward and they're all yelling at the top of their lungs for the police, while Spidey thinks, "This is Batty. Them calling for help against me." We get to page 3 and we see Spidey in the foreground with his back to Badger, and walking up the street behind Badger is a beat cop. The beat cop asks what's going on, and Badger says Spidey attacked them for no reason. Spidey's shook right now. He looks around, sees all his webbing lying around on the ground, and thinks that the webbing, plus it being 3 people's word against his one, means it's time for him to get Ghost. He leaps the hood of a car, springs off of it onto a nearby wall, scrambling up as he thinks that he's just learned a lesson about rushing into things without knowing the score. But I would have thought after the one-man hands team baptized him with the backhand last issue that he'd have got the lesson. But he is 15, and some things take longer to stick than others. While he's climbing the wall, Jesse is screaming for the police officer to shoot him. The Burba gang is all cheesing, staring up at Spidey, and Skinny Pete gives Jesse credit for outsmarting Spidey, who he calls a creep. The police officer's still on the scene though, and he says if he were Spidey, he'd have tackled them himself because they have larceny written all over them. But he's not Spidey, so nobody cares what he'd do, and he probably would have gotten washed. Abolish the police. Spidey's in his feelings now. He crawls up the rooftop and sits down, and he's pointing at the billboard of JJ, and he's screaming, "It's all his fault! On account of Jameson stirring everyone up against me, even cheap crooks now think they don't have to fear me anymore." But it's not about them fearing you, Spidey. It's about due process. Spidey, you have the right to make a citizen's arrest in my opinion, but not the right to launch a preemptive strike. I don't think anybody in any capacity has a right to attack anyone for what they might do. This ain't Minority Report, it's New York City. Back 2. Spidey's blaming JJ, and he hops up from the roof and says it's time he paid JJ a visit before he web swings over to J. Jonah Jameson Publishing, the limestone building in Midtown. You can't miss it. Spidey gets to JJ's office and slides the window open. Little trespassing, no problem. And finding the office empty, he says he's going to leave a little souvenir for the paper magnate. Whatever the gift was, we don't see, but a few minutes later, we see Spidey on top of a water tower, and he's watching the streets below as 3 police cars come speeding down the block, all sirens blaring. Spidey follows them, and in the final panel, we see Spidey in a pretty beautiful panel. He's upside down again, hanging from the side of a building on a web, so he's definitely getting comfortable hanging upside down these days. And across the street from Spidey, we see the cops on the ground outside of their patrol cars, while Spidey spots a guy in a green shirt and brown potato sack pants climbing the ladder to the building roof across from him. Of course, Spidey thinks this must be the guy the cops are looking for and says it'll be duck soup for him to grab him up. Spidey's going to help because Spidey can. Great power. You already know the rest. We get to page 4 and Spidey's ready for action. He shines his Spidey belt light on a nearby wall to show the man what he's up against, and then pounces toward the man. But when the guy turns to face him, Spidey screams, "Holy Hannah!" and asks, "Who are you?" as if he recognizes the man. Spidey's just surprised the man, but he's already over it. He turns around, hand on his waist, cucumber cool, and says, "I didn't expect a welcoming committee, but since you asked, I call myself the Sandman. Now then, any other dumb questions?" And Spidey says he heard of him, but he didn't believe the man was real. He says if the stories are true, the Sandman is wanted from Maine to Mexico. Maine to Mexico! So the Sandman has just been tearing up the eastern seaboard and southern half of the United States. But Sandman's not interested in Spidey's stories. He says he's got a couple of banks to rob and he doesn't want to work overtime, proving that even if you're a bank robber, you have to make time for yourself. Self-care is important. And Spidey's not trying to hear that. You just shoved me. You're running from the cops. You didn't even comment about how cool my belt light looks. You know what? I'm taking you in. And next panel, Spidey tries to take the Sandman in. He grabs the Sandman from behind saying, "Hold it, Gruesome. Nobody gives Spider-Man the bum's rush." To which the Sandman replies, "You're gonna get worse than that if you don't let go." Spidey doesn't let the Sandman go, and the Sandman proves he can't be held. He turns into soft sand from the knees up and reconstitutes himself behind Spidey. Spidey says, I don't know how you did that, but. And Sandman's like, but nothing. You ain't seen nothing yet because that's child's play. Spidey tries to throw a jab at Sandman's chest that goes clean through, and Spidey screams, it's unbelievable. Your body isn't flesh and blood. My fist goes right through you without hurting you. So now Spidey's in panic mode. I can't even knock this guy out. I can't hit this guy. What am I going to do? And Sandman is so cool. He's really just standing here letting Spidey try to go to work. And Spidey's trying to go to work, but he can't hurt him. And Sandman tells him, you can't hurt me. But that's not turnabout. And in the final panel, we see Spidey throwing a vicious hook at the Sandman's jaw. But Sandman's sand powers are even more advanced than just melting into piles of dust. He turns his jaw as hard as iron and takes the punch without flinching. You get little stars around Spidey's fist. That's the cartoon and comic symbol of pain. So we know our heroes just hurt his hand badly. He cannot hurt this guy. We turn the page and we see the Sandman has just sent his waist rocketing towards Spidey and knocks the webhead over a section of roof that's jutting out. So the Sandman just attacks Spidey with his belly button. This is the strangest fight Spidey has ever been in, and he is not matched up for it at all. He is getting clobbered right now. Spidey, of course, thinks the Sandman's just toying with him and tells himself he's got to use his webs. I've got to use my webs. But when he lands on his back, his mask tears in a 1,000,000-to-1 shot and splits in half, and we have Spider-Pete for the first time out in the world. And of course, Pete's neuroses kicks in right away. He starts thinking about all the things that could go wrong if he continued to try to capture the Sandman with his face exposed in a long yellow panel. The first image in this panel, he's got Sandman webbed up, but the Sandman is saying as soon as the police come, he's going to tell them who Spidey is. But my question is, why does Pete assume a man who spent his time on a lam from Maine to Mexico know who he is as a teenage kid? Just Sandman seeing his face proves nothing. But Pete is 15, so I won't judge him too harshly. Next, he imagines JJ's voice in his head just berating him, saying he should be expelled from school, chased from town, and he should be locked up for life. And finally, that he's just an overgrown delinquent. He wants to put a 15-year-old kid away for life. This is what Pete's imagining in his head. And of course, in the final image, Pete always does Aunt May the dirtiest when he goes into his neurotic thoughts. This image is the image that makes the panel. Pete's imagining how Aunt May's life will turn out without him. And here she's in a green headscarf, a tattered blue shirt dress hybrid, green skirt, and in her hands she's holding a box. The sign on this box says shoelaces 10 cents. Pete has no faith at all in Aunt May's ability to provide for herself despite her making a decent chunk of change in ASM #1 by selling her jewelry. Pete, get over yourself. May has been living in this world a long time. I think May knows about donuts and dimes, Pete. She may have heard. Pete's imagining all of these things and decides he can't take the chance on the Sandman recognizing him and takes off running across the rooftops covering his head. All the while, the Sandman is screaming, "Come back here, you blame coward. The Amazing Spider-Man." Bah! Shout out to Weeks. But Sandman's not sweating it. Spidey's gone. He's going to get back to business. We see him leap feet first from the roof of the building and transform into sand so he's not hurt and reconstitute himself on the sidewalk, saying things like this are easy when you can turn into sand. And I imagine they are. He is fearless, just hopping off of roofs, letting people punch him in the face, taking shots to the chest, like taking shots to the heart. Spidey would have punched his heart out. He's just taking it. When you're sand, I guess, it's all good. What chance did Ozymandias have? None of us have any chance at all against the sands of time. In the final panel, we get a great shot of him walking towards the end of the block saying he's got a date with a bank, while sand continues to fall towards him, filling out his head and right shoulder. It's great art. I love it. Beautiful panel. Sandman gets to the bank on page 6 and we see his powers really do let him do anything. At the door of the bank, he morphs his finger into a key and sliding it into the lock, enters the bank. No problem. One twist. Click, I'm in. Once inside, he flattens his body to as thin as a doormat and slithers beneath the electric eye barrier, which is essentially a laser beam trap. But he slithers under the trap and the gate, blocking the door of the safe before reconstituting himself at the bank vault. Meanwhile, we see Pete at home. He's sitting on his bed, his laboratory equipment in the foreground, and we see that he's in a bit of a struggle. He's got a spool of thread unraveled at his feet, and in his hand, he's poking that thread through the eye of a needle. I think Spidey, philosophy buff that he is, would be thinking how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. But no, Donatello Spisaci, the kid who sewed his own costume, is saying when it comes to sewing, he's, quote, all thumbs. He goes on to say that this whole thing is ridiculous because he's no seamstress, but he has to do it himself because Spidey can't just walk into a tailor shop without people getting at least a little bit suspicious. And I imagine he's right. There's nowhere he could go, hand that costume in, and say, say, hey, can you fix this for me, without people being a little suspicious. That's just how it is. There's only one Spider-Man. It's a unique costume. The only other person who has a copy is the Chameleon, and he's in prison, so the police may have one in impound, but for the most part, it's a unique costume, and people would definitely ask questions, and Pete's the right size for Spidey. Just can't do it. So Pete's sitting here in a great panel with his tongue out the side of his mouth in concentration, and he's sewing his mask together. He stabs his finger with the needle and wishes he had Aunt May's help with this, while a news anchor on TV grabs his attention. This news anchor gives us the origin story of the Sandman, and I'm going to read it because the Sandman is really not trying to be taken alive even a little bit. He's got the mentality of Jim from the town. Shout out to Jeremy Renner. If he's surrounded, he's holding court in the street. The news anchor says, "We bring you a special bulletin. The dreaded Sandman has been reported in our city. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Sandman's background, Channel 17 presents this brief summary. A few months ago, he was an inmate at Island Prison. Known as Flint Marco, he was the most incorrigible prisoner at that maximum security jail. Then one night, he escaped through an unguarded drainage tunnel. Vowing never to be recaptured alive, he headed the FBI list of most wanted criminals as he managed to remain one step ahead of the pursuing lawmen. But as the police dragnet drew ever tighter, he hid in the one place where no one would imagine a man would hide, an atomic devices testing center." All the while the news anchor is telling us this story, we get the visuals, and Flint Marco is shown running a fugitive's version of a decathlon. We see him first in prison, brown jumpsuit, widow's peak, a scowl on his face. Then we see him swimming from Island Prison in the middle of the night, and his escape as searchlights spin above him. So he's combined Escape from Alcatraz and Shawshank Redemption like he's Andy Dufresne. Crawled to freedom through 500 yards of spit-smelling foulness I can't even imagine, or maybe I just don't want to. Shout out Morgan Freeman. Next we see Flint, two smoking pistols in hand, as he's sprinting down the street, firing over his shoulder. So Flint's running around calling himself the Sandman, but Two Gun is a much better nickname. Shout out to Uncasa. So Flint's getting chased by the FBI at this point, and they're so relentless that as they get closer, we see Flint on his belly inside of a fence, a patrol car rolling by on the other side of the fence, in front of a sign that says danger. Keep out. But Flint knows the conditions inside of a prison, and he knows that whatever danger he's in, it's nothing in comparison to having his human rights stolen by the government. Abolish prisons. At the start of page 7, we get the end of his origin story. Flint lives on a beach of this nuclear test site for an unmentioned amount of time, maybe a week, maybe a month, who knows? That doesn't matter. What matters is, if you sit around a bomb testing site long enough, a bomb's going to go off. And it does. A nuclear bomb is dropped on the beach where he's been holed up, and instead of killing him, his molecules merge with the sand on the beach, giving him the fantastic power to morph his body into sand. That's a great origin story. The story shifts back to Pete just as he hears Aunt May coming. He grabs a robe from a hook on the wall, clicks the TV off, and thinks he has to hide his costume fast. Rookie mistake, of course. If you're a superhero, you never keep your costume on in the house. But he gets the robe on in time. We see Aunt May. She enters the room. She's got on a purple full-length dress, so you already know she's Queen May right now. And she tells Pete he's been studying so hard that she brought him some cookies and milk. She takes a look at Pete's face and asks why he looks so agitated and why is he clutching his robe so tightly. She wonders if Pete has a fever, and Pete, thinking it's his best excuse, says he may be a little bit ill. Of course, May goes into mommy mode immediately. She tells him to hop into bed and she'll bring him some aspirin and a thermometer. Pete's feeling coddled. He says, "I'll be okay in a little while, Aunt May." And May leaves the room. Pete turns his attention back to the TV as we see on screen police have surrounded the bank that the Sandman is currently robbing. On live TV, we see the police try to shoot Marco dead as he exits the bank. His right hand raised with the bag of money he was holding from page 1, so we know that's Joe and Tomas just getting their guns off, but it doesn't matter, their bullets are doing nothing to Two Gun. He's smiling through all of this. In the final panel on this page, we see May has returned with the thermometer and aspirin as promised. Pete's got the thermometer poking out of his mouth. He's laying in bed. His glasses are on a nightstand, his blanket is pulled up to his chin, and May is caressing the side of his face. She tells him he's just suffering a little burnout from studying so hard, and he'll feel better after a good night's sleep. Always there for Pete, trying to make sure he's taking care of himself. She knows, Aunt May knows self-care is important, and I hope she's taking care of herself just as much. We turn the page and we're on
The Infinity Page.
And we see the police are not messing around with the Sandman. They're chasing him on foot, in cars, shooting him in the back. They're not trying to let this man escape police justice in New York. I'm convinced the police chief, after dropping the ball on the Chameleon and the Vulture, was called into the mayor's office and told that if he couldn't handle these supervillains, he'd be fired, because we see a level of aggressiveness in action that the police have not shown before. So they're giving chase, non-stop chase, and Sandman gets a little distance between them and transforms into sand on a grassy area of sidewalk covering the bag of money. It's a great panel. panel, we can see Sandman's face in the sand, and we see the legs of Joe and Tomas run past. Tomas, of course, with pistol drawn, because Tomas is a hothead. Sandman has escaped for the moment. The next morning, we're back in Pete's room. He's still got the covers pulled up to his chest, and May, in a very snazzy robe of green with orange trim, is checking a thermometer, saying Pete's perfectly fine. She's going to fix him a warm breakfast, and then, in the words of my Nana, he's going to school. Shout out to my Nana. On the TV behind him, we hear the Sandman's escape, but the police are keeping a constant vigil. Aunt May leaves the room. Pete throws the sheets back, and we see he's been in his costume all night. He says he was up half the night working on the mask, but that left the whole other half to change out of his costume, and he did it. So I know he smells a little bit funky. He spent the evening battling the Sandman on a New York rooftop. Sweat, bird poop, the stink of the feet. These things have to be pumping through his uniform. You think Pete cares? No way. Next panel, we see him coming down the stairs. May is still in her snazzy robe and she's making coffee. Pete's wearing a goldenrod colored vest, so he's really starting to feel this yellow. A white button up underneath, his SJBs of course, and he's tying a black tie. And May tells him to sit down and eat every drop of the food that she's cooked, and she has to go out early today. And I'm sure May is out there bag chasing, trying to make the rent, and Pete thanks her, and he says he's going out early, but tonight he'll be back a little late because he wants to go see Mr. Jameson about something. So he sits down to eat, and May puts her hand to his forehead. She calls Jonah a nice man and says Pete has to be sure to take it easy. Pete tells her not to baby him so much because, quote, "Aw, May, I wish you wouldn't baby me so much. I'm pretty husky, you know?" So Pete thinks he's a big boy. Pete thinks he's husky, and he may be husky, but there's a man out there who's burly. The Sandman's a burly guy, and he gave you the hands one time already. There's a collision coming. I'm looking forward to it. And Pete's not wrong. He is husky, but even if May knew he was Spidey, I'm sure she'd still treat him the same way. She dotes on Pete. She loves the kid. He's got to deal with that, and that sounds like a good problem to me, and that doesn't sound like a problem at all. So Pete's leaving for school. He throws his blazer on and steps out of the house, but not before May hands him an umbrella. Of course, Pete thinks the world would be shocked if they found out Spider-Man had to carry an umbrella, and promises not to exert himself. Meanwhile, a few minutes later in the city, we see J. Jonah Jameson in his usual bah humbug mindset. He's got on his everyday purple pinstripe suit, a brown hat he's removing from his head, and brown loafers. Behind him we have Betty Brant, his secretary. She's sitting at her desk. She's clacking away on her typewriter, and she wishes JJ a good morning. But JJ, of course, is all business. He tells her to bring him the latest bulletins on the Sandman and the file on Spider-Man. The final panel on the page, we see JJ in his office hanging his jacket up and loosening his tie. And I'm convinced the goldenrod tie Pete wore last issue with the tie clip was a gift from JJ, because JJ is wearing the exact same time. We know he's taking a liking to Pete, sees him as a go-getter, so he's probably thinking this is a kid he should put under his wing, and the tie was a gift. JJ's hanging up his jacket while at the same time jumping out of the window with theories not based at all in fact. He wonders if there could be any connection between Spidey and the Sandman, and says that would be a scoop if he could prove it. The only connection between Spidey and Two Gun is radioactivity giving them their powers and their fight on top of the rooftop. So JJ is here, grasping at straws, trying to find anything to put on Spidey. He really does not like that guy. We get to page 9 and we see Jameson sitting in his chair, but he's looking back and down at the chair with a raised eyebrow. Betty Brant comes into the room. She's wearing a vividly red blouse and a black pencil skirt, and she's placing the files Jameson requested on his desk as he screams, "What in the do-blame-ding-busted Sam Hill is on my chair?" He tries to stand up, but we find that the souvenir Spidey has left was webbing in JJ's chair. Webbing that's gotten stuck to his hand and his butt. He screams that he's trapped in the chair and can't get out, and he knows Spidey has something to do with it. He tells Miss Brent not to just stand there gawking and orders her to go find him another pair of trousers. And Betty's a little bit rattled. She screams, "Yes, sir," and runs out of the room. So Jameson gets angry, possibly embarrassed, and he just takes it out on the first person he sees, and that's usually Betty Brant. I hope Betty Brant is a fortified person, because to be this guy's secretary has to be a lot. To be Spider-Man in this universe, in this city, with this man, must be a lot. To be the secretary of this man, with a one-man war against Spidey in this city, must be a lot. Shout outs to Betty Brant. Shout outs to Peter Parker. Y'all going through it. I know it. The next panel, we see Betty and Pete together outside of JJ's office, and I was wrong about JJ. I said he didn't have that Steve Jobs mentality. I said he wore the same suit every day. I was wrong, and Betty's hands are an exact copy of JJ's purple pinstripe pants, so this man has got a closet full of purple pinstripe suits. SJBs meet JJPs. They are out here now. So Betty's holding this replacement pair of pants, and she asks Pete to take them into Jameson because she doesn't want to face the man with the mood he's in. He is terrorizing this woman, and he probably knows it and he probably doesn't. We should be very, very aware about our tirades and our mood swings. Of course, Pete says he'll do it while thinking that he didn't even remember doing that prank. That's understandable. He spent the night fighting living sand, sewing masks, and sleeping in his own filth, so there's a lot on his mind. And Pete takes the pants into Jameson, who's standing behind his desk with his dress shirt on and pinstripe blue and green boxers. He's puffing a cigar, so I'm sure the air is thick with acrid smoke. He sees Pete and gets straight to business, asking if Pete has any new pictures. Pete gives him his pants and says no, that he's been caught up with his studies. Jameson's already in a bad mood and he gets into full capitalist mode, telling Pete he's brought great pictures in before, but the whole news business is what have you done for me lately. He says if Pete can't find the pictures, he'll get someone who can. But he knows, like I know, like you know, that there is no one who can get pics of Spider-Man that are better than Pete's. And realizing Pete has no pictures, he asks what the kid came in to see him for, because even in his underwear, JJ's a busy man. If you in my office, you probably busy, but you might not be busy enough. We get a great panel of him tucking his t-shirt into his new pants as Pete asks for an advance on his next check. And that's it. JJ has heard enough. Cigar chomped down on the side of his mouth. He screams, "An advance? Are you kidding? What do you do with money? Eat it? Look, this is a business, not a charity. When you bring me exclusive pictures, I pay for them, but not before." He kicks Pete out of his office, telling him not to come back until Pete has the pictures. We get a great facial expression on Pete's face, like, this guy is nuts! Nuts! Pete thinks he needed the money for experiments with his webbing, but no, he can't tell JJ that. He gets out of there. There's nothing I can do. I can't change this guy's mind. I'm out of here. I gotta get to school. We see Pete outside of the building at the bus stop, and we're still outside of JJ's corner office, so Pete's a blue ant from our vantage point, and Pete's thinking he has to get to school. While in the office, JJ is making the news, not reporting it. He says, "Once I get those pics of Spider-Man, I run them next to some pics of Sandman with a caption reading, 'Are they the same man? What a feature that will make.'" Making the news. This is unethical to me because there is no connection between these men. We already see the Daily Bugle has a readership that believes the things it prints, and JJ is now treating a reputable newspaper like a gossip rag. Since 1897, this has been a newspaper, and this is how JJ is treating it, a one-man vendetta. Not new for New York newspapers, to be sure, but unethical, in my opinion, to say the least. In the final panel, we see Pete stepping off the bus outside of Midtown High where he goes to school. We have Flash and Blondie in the background. Blondie's going monochrome orange today, top and skirt, while Flash, fashion on trash as usual Thompson, is wearing an ugly brown sweater with a horizontal yellow stripe and green pants. Flash is spilling salt all over the front of the building. He's asking Blondie if she's really considering going out on a date with Pete tonight. She says Pete's asked her so many times she doesn't have the heart to refuse him again. And sidebar, if you have to ask a woman out to the point they're using umpteenth like Bruni in issue 1 or so many like Blondie here, even if you get the date, it's probably out of pity. Avoid pity dates because everything you do is for naught. Some people just don't feel your wave. You gotta know when to fold them. Here's a hint. If you ask the first time and she says no, fold them. Believe me when I tell you, you do not want a relationship to start based off pity. Back 2. So Pete's got a date with the most popular girl in school and he's stepping off of the bus and not thinking about it at all. His mind is on finding the Sandman and getting his rematch. Pete wants the W, Spidey wants the W. We start page 10 with Pete walking up the stairs to the school alongside Flash and Blondie. Blondie's asking Pete what time he's picking her up for their date later, and Pete thinks, "Suffering cats, I forgot all about my date with Liz tonight. I have to break it." So we finally got a name for Blondie. Ladies and gentlemen, Liz is in the building. Pete tells Liz something came up and he can't make their date, and Flash says she's lucky because now she can go out with a real man. Quote, "Namely me." The next panel, they're in the school. Pete's got his umbrella up near his face and he's telling Liz not to be angry with him, but Liz isn't trying to hear it. She has the classic, "Well, I never" expression all over her face, and she says if the top student in the whole school can't spare one night for a date, she feels sorry for him. And I think Liz's anger is valid here. She decided to go on a date with a guy she doesn't like, and then he breaks off the plans last minute. She probably thinks it's lowbrow, and she's right. She tells him goodbye, while Flash makes fun of the fact that Pete's carrying an umbrella. Man's fashion sense is on trash, and he's focused on the goldenrod kid over here, like his fashion sense competes because he doesn't hold an umbrella. Get it together, Flash. The next panel we see Pete, he's in class now, he's in the foreground, he's got his book open. Liz is behind him, stage right, and she's just glaring at him. Flash is directly behind him with the biggest Kool-Aid smile on his face, reveling in Pete's misery. He's staring at the back of Pete's head. Liz is staring at Pete. Pete's got the book open and he's staring at the book. And of course, Pete's thinking, as he usually does, that being Spider-Man is causing him more harm than good, when his teacher snaps at him to stop daydreaming in class. How would the teacher know he's daydreaming though? He's got his book open, he's not ice grilling anyone like Liz is, or staring at the back of someone's head like creepy Flash Thompson, but he's the person singled out. Unfair. Meanwhile, Two Gun is really being pursued by the police. Apparently, I wasn't the only one wondering why my tax dollars were being funneled to the NYPD for lackluster performance, because they are working in this one. I imagine the police chief called officers Joe and Tomas into his office and told him to get this guy off the street by whatever means, and Joe and Tomas took that directive seriously.
Just give us the green light, boss. We'll handle it. Good. I'm counting on you two. We got it, boss. We brought sand to the beach.
We see the Sandman, who's wearing a really snazzy purple fedora, being tackled around the legs by Tomas, but Two Gun is quicker than that. He turns his legs into sand and keeps running. The next panel, we see both Joe and Tomas chasing the Sandman down another block, but now the Sandman transformed into a sand snake and slithers out of their grasp. They chase this man all the way out of the city and into Forest Hill, Queens, where Sandman decides to hole up in a high school to rest before he continues his run from the law. And of course it's Midtown High, because Spidey's villains are always attracted to the wall crawler. And in the next panel, we see Sandman hiding behind a wall as Pete walks by carrying a box filled with old bottles. We find out from Pete's thoughts that he has to take this box to the boiler room as punishment for not paying attention, while the Sandman thinks he's got to find an empty classroom. And Pete gets to the basement. He runs into a janitor dressed in a purple jumpsuit with matching hat. Very regal janitor we have here. This janitor, he's adjusting a king-size vacuum cleaner and tells Pete to leave the bottles, that he'll get rid of them. And when I think of this king-size vacuum cleaner, I think of the episode of the Wayans brothers. Shout out to the Wayans brothers, Sean and Marlon in particular in this instance, when Sean became an ad agent and he had to find a slogan for the Oswald vacuum. Pete thinks the janitor doesn't know how lucky he has it, that the janitor's only worry is keeping the school clean. And that's a naive thought. Does Pete know how much work it takes to be a janitor? Does he know how to remove coffee stains from desks, graffiti from the walls, scrape gum from tables? Does he know how to operate a floor buffer, plaster a wall, the proper way to mop? There is a proper way. How to disinfect a toilet bowl or apply a fresh coat of paint? There's a lot to think about as a janitor. Garbage, HVAC, assembly and deconstruction of equipment. And I'm sure Pete could probably handle those things, but he doesn't. But Pete thinks it, so I'm not going to knock him too much. Shout out to maintenance workers. Shout out to the janitors. While Pete's in the basement, in the final panel, we get the Sandman above him on the ground floor. Two Gun hears someone coming and ducks into a classroom. We're on page 11 now, when Sandman has burst into a room filled not only with students, but their teacher. He's in a brown suit, sky blue tie, and the principal is in the room. This principal has on a pair of semi-rimless glasses, a three-piece SJB colored suit, and a red tie. The Sandman just burst in and all the kids have a look of fear on their face. The teacher looks worried and the principal shouts, "It's the Sandman," but the expression on his face is so indifferent, like a kid just walked in late, disturbing his lesson. This principal is giving me big Rick Latimer and Joe Clark vibes from the movies The Principal and Lean On Me, respectively. No nonsense, tough talking, and fearless. Shout out to Jim Belushi, Morgan Freeman, and the real Joe Clark. Back two. So we're in this classroom filled with students. Flash is here, Liz is here, Bruni's in the building, and we see that this is Principal Davis, and he introduces himself to the Sandman. He starts to make a demand, but the Sandman says, quote, "Quiet you, I'll do the talking." "So you're the principal, eh? Know something? I never graduated school. Maybe this is my chance to get a diploma." The principal is confused, of course. He screams he doesn't know what the Sandman is talking about, and the Sandman says straight up, "I deserve the best of everything, so I want you to write me out a diploma, or else." This man is running from the NYPD. Joe and Tomas are on his tail. He's got the FBI after him, and he doesn't care at all. The man wants his diploma. He wants that respect on his name that comes with graduating high school. Roach out here hustling backwards, and the Sandman's trying to bully his way forward. Both seem to me to be bad life strategies. And Principal Davis is about 5'11", so he's standing almost eye to eye with the Sandman, and he says, "Nothing can make me do that. A diploma must be earned. Your threats can't make me violate my trust or my duties." And the kids are loving this. A red-headed boy says, "Listen to their principal go," standing up to the Sandman. And Flash says, "There's a man with guts," so a lot of respect for Davis going around. And Sandman hems Davis up in the next panel, and Davis shouts to the kids to run, to go get help, and he's going to hold the Sandman off while they escape. I'm calling this principal Big Brass Davis because he's fearless. I imagine the 80s saxophone action movie music playing in the background as Sandman raises a fist saying he's going to teach Big Brass a lesson right now. But no, we see Spidey in the final panel, and I imagine he's leapt from a sheer wall because he is bouncing from the floor into the room. Off that bounce, he's leaped at Sandman and cracked him straight in the jaw. There is a look of pure pain on the Sandman's face. He usually sees the attacks coming, so they never hurt. But Spidey has just rocked him, and Spidey shouts, "You've got that backwards, loudmouth. You're the one who's got a lot to learn." Big Brass shouts, "Spider-Man!" But I feel like he shouted it like, "Yo, I had it handled, bruh, coming in here stealing my shine." Meanwhile, all the kids are loving it. They're all excited. One kid by the door in a bright yellow long sleeve shirt, he screams, "Wowee! This sure has studying calculus beat all hollow. They are losing it. My people, we got action. We get to page 12 and Ditko is firing on all cylinders. Crowd reaction shot? No. We get the crowd in action shot as they stand behind Spidey, who's standing with his dukes up ready to rumble. We got a brown haired kid in a bow tie screaming, "Give him one for us, pal." We got Flash cheesing with that same weird smile. Liz is behind him, a hand to her cheek. She's flustered. Bruni's grinning from ear to ear beside Flash, and behind him, a brown-haired kid is cheering Spidey on. The irony is not lost on Spidey. He wonders if they'd be cheering so loud if they found out Spidey was really Triple P's out here. Puny Peter Parker. We get Spidey and Sandman facing off in the next panel, and Sandman has never lost a fight, so his smack talk is already leaving his mouth. He says, "That was a real dramatic entrance, Spider-Man, but enjoy it while you can, 'cause this time you ain't getting away from me so easy." But Spidey's not talking, Spidey's thinking. He knows he needs to get the Sandman away from the children before one of them gets hurt. He goes right at the Sandman and is about to swing with an overhand strike, but his spider sense warns him that 2 guns hard in his face again, so Spidey calls an audible. He makes like he's going to swing at the Sandman's jaw, but at the last second, he grabs 2 Gun around the neck and flips the man over his head, calling him a braggart as he does it. And Sandman goes crashing through the door of the classroom into the hallway while Spidey thinks, "Perfect, I got him out of the room. Now to find a way to hold him until the police can get here." In the final panel, we get a crowd reaction shot of the children. Everyone's smiling with glee. This is better than calculus after all. But Liz looks worried. She's got a hand to her face and she's wondering where Peter is. Flash doesn't care. He calls Peter coward and says the kid is probably somewhere hiding under a desk. Huh, if life were so easy. We get to page 13 and we see Spidey's in mid-air in the middle of the hallway as the Sandman swings his arms, now transformed into giant anvils, at the wall crawler. We've got kids running by screaming, we've got Tao flying into the air, and Spidey's thinking he just threw this man through a wooden door, and Sandman is already back on his feet. So Spidey's got to get Sandman to focus on him until the school's clear of people. This is what's running through Spidey's mind while the action is going, and I love that when Spidey is really trying to figure things out before he has it won. He's not talking, he's thinking. He's doing this right now. Spidey hits the floor and backflips into a history classroom as 2 Gun follows him inside, smashing the floor, sending an arm rocketing at the webhead. And Spidey thinks Sandman is pressing him too hard. He needs more room to maneuver because the advantage right now is all Sandman. But this is Peter Parker's school. Spidey knows the layout, so Spidey has home field advantage. He squeezes out of the room and lures the Sandman into the gymnasium. Spidey leaps over a pommel horse easily, barely dodging the Sandman's anvil arms, and thinking he's got some breathing room, lands on top of a basketball hoop. Spidey thinks from up here he can web the Sandman up, and we see him start spraying 2 Gun with webbing. 2 Gun calls him a tricky little clown, ain't you? And Spidey hops down from the backboard saying, "Brother, you don't know how tricky." Spidey's in his bag now, Sandman's in his bag now, we have egos colliding, we have fists colliding, it's all happening in the gymnasium. Spidey's spoken too soon. 2 Gun seeps through the webbing saying, "You gotta be trickier than that," and slithers as a sand pal over to Spidey, asking him if there's anything else Spidey wants to try. And Spidey says, "Why not? You're not going anywhere." Page 14 opens with a beautiful panel. We see Spidey bursting through the gymnasium doors from the roof, and beneath him, the Sandman's hand is as wide as the door frame, and it's swiping at him. It is a beautiful panel, and the Sandman, of course, as most men do in Amazing Spider-Man, has a great manicure working. And Spidey's thinking he's trying to sound confident, but he'll be blamed if he knows what to try next. So blame is slang for damned, but Spidey's a kid, so blamed is better, I guess. But he will be literally blamed. He lives in JJ Town, and JJ Town don't like spiders. Phew. Now Spidey's backed into a corner, literally, and he's going blow for blow with 2 Gun. But when Spidey throws a left, he's made a big mistake. The Sandman lets Spidey's hand go through him and then locks the sand around it so Spidey can't escape. The Sandman really does have an awesome power set, and he's taking the time to learn what he can do. He has tricks in his bag for days. And Sandman, he's not used to losing, he's always winning, so he's always talking his crap. He says, "I don't want you to get bored, chum, so I'll hit you a different way. Ever get any love taps from a guy's rock hard head?" And cracks Spidey with a headbutt, noggin and noggin. Spidey seeing stars, and Sandman headbutts him again. Spidey knows if he didn't have his spider strength, he'd be finished right now. Done, kaput. His arm is trapped in the Sandman, he's down on one knee, he's groggy, and with his last bit of strength, we see in the final panel, he flips the Sandman over his head, smashing 2 Gun into an iron stairway post. And 2 Gun's head explodes into sand on impact. And we're on page 15 now, and we see Spidey on one knee getting to his feet, but Sandman's not done. Spidey already sees the man's body reforming at his feet, and in seconds, we have Sandman's upper body crawling along the floor, sand trailing behind it, the Sandman talking smack as usual. And Spidey thinks if anyone wanted to trade places with him right now, they wouldn't have to convince him too much. While Spidey's standing around thinking nonsense, Sandman sends his lower half at Spidey and turns the sand into quicksand. In ASM number 1, when Chameleon sends Spidey that signal, if you recall, Spidey was at a museum in Queens at a spider exhibit, probably studying what different Spideys could do and wondering if he had those abilities, trying to understand what he's become a little better. Sandman is proving that he might not have a high school diploma, but he definitely has spent time learning about the power he has because he is doing all kinds of tricks with this sand. He is always so calm because he knows himself. He is a great villain. Back 2. While Spidey's legs are trapped, Two Gun turns into a wave of sand and crashes into Spidey, covering the webhead in sand, and Spidey doesn't fight against it. Instead, we see that he's getting as small as possible as the Sandman hardens around him in the shape of a large ball. And Sandman says he notices Spidey isn't talking smack anymore, and he's starting to feel pretty cocky. But Spidey's managed to get the Sandman to the steps of the basement, and we see, in the final panel, Spidey as a ball wrapped in the Sandman bouncing down the stairs to the basement. Sandman says, "You just belong in the agony lane, brain. This ain't gonna help you." They slam into a wall at the bottom of the landing on page 16, and Spidey leaps free of Sandman, who is now a sand sheet, and he immediately reforms into his head and torso combo, sand lower half, and charges at Spidey, saying he's done fooling around. But Spidey says, "Big whoop, I'm just getting started." They're in front of a workbench, and Spidey turns, grabs a screwdriver from the shelf, and tells Sandman to stay back because the drill can punch through anything. Of course, Sandman keeps coming, turning his body into sand, and Spidey pushes the drill through his body, thinking that the Sandman doesn't even suspect what he's about to do. In the next panel, Spidey's pushed his whole arm into Two Gun, who's all sand now, and he of course calls Spidey a nut. That's what he says. "How'd a nut like you? A nut!" And Spidey says, "Stick around and find out." He drops the drill and with blinding speed does a 360, grabs the vacuum cleaner the janitor was setting up earlier in the day, and quipping, "So you wanted a diploma, eh?" turns it on. Sandman comes at him, still all sand, and Sandman says, "What's that gotta do with anything?" In the final panel, Spidey replies, "Just this. Here's the first part of your education, courtesy of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man," and turns the hose of the vacuum cleaner on the Sandman. Here's why I say Flint Two Gun Marco, aka the Sandman, is never rattled. Spidey catches him in this hose, and Flint's response to being outsmarted and beaten is, "Oh." But that "oh" says so much, like, "Damn, Spidey, you got me with a vacuum, that's deep, 'cause I'm dirt, I respect it." Cool as a cucumber, that Sandman is. Defeated, that Sandman is. Going back to the Wayans brothers, this Oswald vacuum that Spidey used, what was the tagline that Sean came up with? Oh, I remember.
"Oswald vacuums really suck."
And they really do. Good job, Spidey. We get to page 17 and Spidey's thinking he's finally beaten the Sandman, that the canvas bag he's trapped him in should hold, and he wishes that he got pictures of the fight because Jameson would pay a fortune. And then Spidey has an idea. He takes his camera from his waist and sits it on a shelf across the room. He finds a sand bucket. Remember, this is 1963. People kept buckets of sand around to douse fires, so that's not odd. Spidey's got the sand bucket. He digs his hands in the sand and throws it into the air. While the sand's falling, he dives into the middle of it while his camera, set on a timer, snaps pictures of him punching this lifeless sand. Spidey is shameless. He grabs another handful, tosses it up into the air, and gives it a left jab. He's going to sell these photos to Jameson, and he's convincing himself it isn't unethical by saying it's just like retaking a shot on a movie scene. As shameless as JJ. As shameless as JJ. I got no worse insult for my man Pete in this moment. But you can't make the donuts on dimes, and his auntie need that bill money, so I understand. We're outside of the school now, and we've got the police captain, and Officer Joe, Tommy gun in hand, is telling him that all units are in position, while Officer Tomas, a Tommy gun in his own hand, is pointing to officers, probably giving instructions for where they need to set up. When JJ fights his way through the police line, JJ pees and brown bowler hat on his head. He stops beside the police captain in the final panel and shaking his fist says, "What are you waiting for, Captain? Why don't you charge in there and overpower the Sandman?" And the captain says, "I don't come down to the Bugle and tell you how to run your newspaper. Let me pluck this chicken, you just hold the tail, huh?" He says he's got to be sure all the students are out before the shooting starts because you know if Joe and Tomas have Tommy guns and get that green light, they are going to light this school up. Shout out Ziggy, shout out Rivers. Page 18 starts with a panel of JJ. He's pointing at the school. We've got a Tommy gun being held by a well-manicured hand in the foreground, and Jameson's telling the captain that the school's cleared and he should absolutely send Joe and Tomas in now before Spidey and the Sandman escape. But the captain says, "You got it wrong, JJ. Spidey's been helping us fight the Sandman." And the captain's right. Because of Spidey, the school was cleared and surrounded, and this captain is going by what he sees right now, not what the Daily Bugles told him. And Jameson says, "So he's got you fooled too, huh? I know him and Sandman are working together." The captain shouts, "Look!" And at their feet, Spidey's Spiderhead logo lights up the ground. We see Spidey, he's standing on the roof of the high school, one hand on his hip, the American flag billowing beside him, and he screams down to the captain, "You can breathe easy, Captain! Sandman is inside, all wrapped up for you." And Jameson is pissed. He's staring up shouting, and he's saying that it's a trick, and the police have to capture Spidey and hold him until they find the Sandman. And the captain shouts up to Spidey to come down so Spidey can give them a full report. JJ is right beside the police captain, but he doesn't care about a report. He wants to know why Spider-Man can run around being a vigilante, taking the law into his own hands. And in the final panel, we get a close-up of Spidey's face as he thinks that he'll never be able to please Jameson and that he has to be careful in any crowd the man's in because Jameson has a gift for getting the crowd riled up. If the police listen, Spidey could be arrested. While Spidey's thinking this, he's imagining himself being held by the captain while Jameson pulls his mask off with two revolvers aimed at him. Joe and Tomas, probably, no way. They're hotheads, that's an of course. So Spidey's not going down there because he knows, like I know, that no matter how cool police officers come off in a fictional tale, they're not to be trusted, especially around CD media figures. Abolish the police. On page 19, instead of dropping down, Spidey sends the canvas bag Sandman's trapped in, saying, "Here, Sandman's inside. Better handle with care." And this canvas bag just looks like a large yellow boxer's heavy bag. Nothing too crazy. Good trap though for the Sandman. It's an ironical trap. I like ironical traps. Jameson snaps, spilling salt all over the steps of Midtown High. Over the salt, Flash already spilled, and he screams, shaking a fist, "Captain, make Spider-Man come down too. Why won't he face us? What is he trying to hide? As a taxpayer, I demand he be apprehended." Can we get a price check on privilege in aisle 4? That's a check on privilege in aisle 4. Meanwhile, Spidey's swinging through the staircase of his high school, and you know he's monologuing, giving the game away. He says, out loud, "I gotta change back to Peter Parker on the double before they find me." But no worries. In seconds, he's back in his street clothes, fixing his tie and glasses. He's thinking to himself that he hopes no one ties together the disappearance of Spidey with the reappearance of Pete. But we see a hand from off panel reaching for him and someone saying they've been looking for him. It's JJ and he thinks Pete's been hiding in the school. He says that's pretty cool. Did you get any exclusive pics of the two ministers running around? Pete says absolutely. I was lucky. He hands JJ the film saying he didn't have time to get it developed. But please, if you have this issue, if you don't, go find this issue and look at the scumbag smile on JJ's face as he replies, "That's alright. Don't worry about it. I'll take the cost of developing out of your pay." We already saw in the One Man's Trash bonus episode that JJ is not above ripping Pete off, and I think this is the moment where it all begins because he's smiling like he's about to run up the cost of developing this film for Pete. Still, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out the knot of cash he has on him and pays Pete. Meanwhile, Tomas approaches the captain. He calls him Chief, so now I assume Tomas sounds like Hustle Man from the GOAT sitcom Martin. Shout out to Tracy Morgan. And Tomas is telling the captain, "Not a sign of Spider-Man, Chief." And the captain scratches his head and says, "Oh well, we didn't have anything on him and we got the Sandman, so it's fine." Jameson doesn't want to hear it. He is tirading in this hallway right now. For 2 panels, he lets the captain have it. He's screaming about how his paper's going to write about the damage done to the school, wrecking public property, and he says that if Spidey would have let the police handle it, they could have just kept the building surrounded and starved 2 guns out. The Sandman has been endowed with a nearly unstoppable power of the modern age. He's been kissed by the Atom, and Jameson thinks siege tactics are going to work like he's trying to get into Ilium. This man doesn't get it. This man would climb into the Trojan horse by himself thinking he was being clever. You're not being clever, sir. This is the Sandman. He is kissed by the Atom. You need to come out of the Stone Ages. This is not that world, sir. This man doesn't get it. This ain't Troy, and the Sandman ain't Helen. Check on privilege on aisle 4. And the captain knows it. He says the police appreciate Spidey's help and that Jameson can print whatever he wants. But eventually, people are going to realize that JJ is just using his paper for a private grudge. Made him eat it. Sit down. Be quiet. While Jameson's getting his humble pie at the end of page 19, on page 20, Pete is excited. He's got a wad of cash in his right hand. Both arms are up to the sky, and he's thinking that he doesn't care what JJ thinks for once. He thinks, "I polished off Sandman, got the money I needed, and now there's nothing to stop me from dating Liz tonight. I better go and find her." We get to the next panel when Pete spots Liz in a crowd of their classmates. She's with Flash and Bruni. Bruni has lost a lot of respect for Pete. I don't know if it's for disappearing, breaking his date with Liz, or both. But when Pete screams to Liz to wait up, Bruni shouts, well, look who's here. Mr. Bookworm of 1963. And Flash looks back. He's got Liz in front of him, and he says, of course Pete pops back up now that the fighting's done. Liz, arms folded, asks what Peter wants because she's quite busy. And Pete's feeling himself right now. His adrenaline's pumping, so he shoots his shot. He says, "Gee, don't be angry, Liz. I just wanted to tell you that I can take you out tonight after all." But Liz isn't having it. She throws her head back, runs her hand through her hair. I imagine her thinking as if, like she's Alicia Silverstone in Clueless, Shout out to Alicia Silverstone. And Liz says, really? Perhaps we should declare this a national holiday. Sorry, Mr. Parker, but I have made other plans. Flash, still with his stupid grin, says she means him and tells Pete to run along and get his umbrella. And I promise you, he reaches up and pats Pete on the cheek like, get out of here, sonny. Pete's not having that. I wouldn't have it either. And Pete makes his move. He grabs a chunk full of brown, ugly sweater with his left, makes a fist with his right, and threatens to wipe the leer off Flash's face right now for good. I will smack your lips across the room and have them planted on the wall. People will walk by and ask, why is the wall always looking like it wants to kiss me? And those will be your lips, Flash Thompson. If Flash wants all the smoke, Flash says, well, so the worm finally turned, eh? Okay, worm, I've been waiting for this. And it just shows the type of jerk Flash is. Pete's considered by everyone to be weakest among them, and Flash has been waiting, he says, to put hands on him. We should be mindful of people who find joy in harming those weaker than themselves. Flash is really a jerk. Meanwhile, Pete's about to ram his fist down Flash's throat when we get a great panel of the hottest graphic in superhero comic books. The half-man, half-amazing Spider-Man. Shout out to Pete Rock. Shout out to Anthony Haywood. And Spidey's thinking, wait, what am I doing? I can't afford to lose my temper like this. With the strength of Spider-Man, if I get into a fight with a normal guy, I could pulverize him. And Spidey's thinking, like a hero, like a person who understands. When you're truly bigger and stronger, you have an obligation to show restraint. Great power. You already know. He lets Flash go. He says forget it. He says I've got more important things to do. And of course Flash, with the peanut gallery behind him, says, yeah, like chickening out of a fight and hiding when there's trouble. You're real busy. So Flash is just never going to let up on this kid. We get to page 21 and one of the kids, green suit, blue tie. He's treating Pete like a child. And he asks if Pete wants help crossing the street. He grabs Pete by the shoulder, and his mind is immediately blown. He tells Flash, yo, you gotta come check this out. Come feel this kid's muscles. That Pete's got a weightlifter's muscles beneath his jacket. But Liz doesn't care what kind of muscles Pete has beneath his jacket. Nose still in the air. She says that it's a shame he doesn't have the courage to match. But we were all in that classroom. Not one student did anything more than Pete did. None of them could. So courage in what way? To stand there and be traumatized? I prefer to hide in the closet if it's all the same to you, Liz. But she's over him. Flash is too. And Flash says, you said it. Let's get out of here. These guys are boring me. This company is boring me. Let's roll out. The next panel, we see him speeding off in his convertible. Liz riding shotgun. His flunkies in the back while Pete stands holding his umbrella on the corner. So Pete didn't lose the umbrella. Pete thinks that now Liz thinks he's a coward, and that's pretty hard to stomach. As Flash peels off, he insults Pete again, calling him brainwave and telling Pete not to let any kindergarten kids run off with his books. And Liz shows some compassion. She shows Flash that's enough, that there's no reason to be that cruel. And Flash replies, tuh, woman. This is the guy she chose. When you say show compassion and he says, tuh, women. I don't know, Flash. Red flagging. The next panel, we have a crowd shot, a bunch of people passing a newsstand, and we get some great commentary. We have an older lady, monochrome green working, hat to hose, and she's giving Spidey props for catching the Sandman. There's an old guy next to her, brown jacket, brown hat, and he's saying, yeah, but the paper says Spidey is just as bad as the Sandman. We have a little girl wearing orange with pigtails telling a boy in a green jacket, don't you just wish you could be Spidey? And the little kid's like, nah, give me the Human Torch any day. So we got the two most famous teenagers, and kids are picking sides, and Spidey's got fans, and the Torch has got fans, and I think it's cool both ways. We have two women holding groceries. One of them has a bob haircut, black shirt, blue skirt. She's saying that JJ thinks Spidey has no business catching criminals. The woman she's speaking to, shout out to Steve Ditko, the crowd reaction god, because we've seen this woman before. She's wearing a red Moroccan hat, a red jacket, and large earrings, and this was the woman in ASM number 2 who was staring up at Vulture speechless as he stole bonds from the man in broad daylight on the street. She was terrified that day, so I would expect her to be on Spider's side, but she says JJ is right. She says who knows when Spidey will turn against society. We have a guy in a brown flat cap. He's wondering why a guy would wear a goofy costume and run around chasing criminals. Another guy in a green suit with matching hat, twirling his finger next to his head, the universal sign for crazy, and he's saying Spidey's probably just a neurotic and has delusions of grandeur. And finally, we have Pete, clutching his umbrella, listening to all this. In the final panel, we get Spider-Pete. He's wearing his costume except his mask, which is in the foreground next to one of his web shooters on his dresser. And the words in box say he's bewildered, confused, and bitter. As he stands here as Spider-Pete, a large spider web behind him, he asks if the people could be right. If he's just a kook chasing fame and glory. And he wonders if he's more interested in the adventure of being Spidey than in the actual helping of people. And he asks why doesn't he give it up? But he says he can't. He must have been kissed by the Atom for a reason. And no matter how hard it gets, he's going to keep being Spider-Man, and he hopes someday that the world understands. We get a small caption box saying the next issue will be out soon, and that brings this issue to a close. Before I say anything else, I want it known that Pete kind of looked down on the janitor in this issue, and I wonder if Ditko gave the man that royal purple on purpose. In the end, it was the tool of the janitor that saved the day, not any of Spidey's powers. I think if it was intended, that's an awesome little message to plant. I think if it wasn't, it is an awesome reach on my part, but I like a good reach, especially and always if it elevates people who may be in a position we as society instinctively look down on. I was in a food fight in high school once. It was wild. Milk, burgers, salad, slices of ham. Food was flying. You think Pete's fight with the Sandman was worse than the janitor? Usually alone because you know America will underfund the crap out of a school. You think his fight is more difficult than a person cleaning that up? I have never seen a small lunchroom. This brings us to the end of the main episode. I saw a lot of ingenuity in this one as Ditko did a great job of showing the Sandman in motion. I think it was a difficult task in those early days, figuring out exactly how much control Flint Marko would have over his powers and how to capture a person with his power set in motion in the still images of comics, but I enjoyed it a lot. I truly did. I'm really glad Liz has a name now. I love the bit about Spidey webbing JJ's chair, and most important, I love that Spidey realized that sometimes to stop the impossible, you just need a simple fix. This time, it was the Oswald vacuum cleaner. And yeah, it really sucked. Next week, Spidey enters the big leagues as he takes on arguably the greatest villain in the Marvel Universe, Victor Von Doom, in the Amazing Spider-Man #5, Spider-Man, Marked for Destruction by Dr. Doom. If you know Doom like I know Doom, you'll be back. If you're a patron, shoot on over to patreon.com/HSPP to check out our bonus episode. This week, we're back in the House of Ideas with one of my top 5 superheroes of all time, the man without fear himself. Join me as I dive into Daredevil, Volume 3, Number 1, Man Without Fear. It's a story that captures everything I love about the character from art to story, and I'm so excited to run through it with you. If you're not a patron, shoot on over and sign up now. Matt Murdock is definitely worth it if I do say so myself, and I always say so myself. With all that said, thanks for running with me today. It's always appreciated. Please like, please comment, please subscribe, please share, please take care, and please think of the world and be true to yourself. And remember, with great power, you know the rest. You know it. Make sure you're being responsible. I'm out of here.